Hello friends, I welcome you all here at TNV Academy. In this session, we are going to talk about the clause 8.4, Supply and Demand of an International Standard, ISO IEC 20001 2018, Information Technology Service Management. In this session, we shall cover all the requirements of clause 8.4, Supply and Demand, in detail. As the requirements of the clause 8.4 depend on the requirements of clause 6, clause 8.1, clause 8.2 and clause 8.3, I would like to recommend you referring these clauses of ISO 20001 2018 also for better understanding of clause 8.4. Now, the mandatory documentation requirements as evidence or proof under this clause 8.4 are: Clause 8.4.3 Capacity Management. Under this clause, the capacity requirements for human, technical, information, and financial resources shall be determined, documented, and maintained, taking into consideration the service and performance requirements. Let's discuss about the outcome of this session. After completing this session, you will be enabled to understand supply and demand requirements necessary to support the operation of the SMS and the services. You will also learn budgeting and accounting for services, demand management, and capacity management as required, meeting the requirement of the standard. Now, let's have an introduction of Clause 8.4, Supply and Demand. Clause 8.4 regulates the management of supply and demand. This clause governs budgeting and accounting for services, demand management, capacity management. It has three subclauses. Subclause 8.4.1 Budgeting and accounting for services. Subclause 8.4.2 Demand management. Subclause 8.4.3 Capacity management. Let me simply read the requirements of clause 8.4.1 first. Subclause 8.4.1 Budgeting and accounting for services. The organization shall budget and account for services or groups of services in accordance with its financial management policies and processes. Cost shall be budgeted to enable effective financial control and decision-making for services. At planned intervals, the organization shall monitor and report on actual costs against the budget, review the financial forecast, and manage costs. Here is a note. Many but not all organizations charge for their services. Budgeting and accounting for services in this document excludes charging to ensure applicability to all organizations. Coming to the explanation part of subclause 8.4.1. Subclause 8.4.1 regulates the budgeting and accounting of services. The budgeting process is indeed closely related to planning, but the accounting process is closely related to the control and follow-up process. So, requirement is to understand planning, control, and follow-up process to understand this subclause 8.4.1. Now, let me read the requirement of subclause 8.4.2, Demand management. At planned intervals, the organization shall: Point 1. Determine current demand and forecast future demand for services. Point 2. Monitor and report on demand and consumption of services. Here is another note. Demand management is responsible for understanding current and future customer demand for services. Capacity management works with demand management to plan and provide sufficient capacity to meet the demand. Clause 8.4.2 deals with demand management, more related to the control process and follow-up. Based on the history of capacity usage, it can be followed up with capacity planning in the coming period. Now, the third subclause is clause 8.4.3, Capacity management. This clause says that the capacity requirements for human, technical, information and financial resources shall be determined, documented and maintained, taking into consideration the service and performance requirements. The organization shall plan capacity to include: Point 1. Current and forecast capacity based on demand for services. Point 2. expected impact on capacity of agreed service level targets, requirements for service availability and service continuity. Point 3. Service scales and thresholds for changes to service capacity. The organization shall provide sufficient capacity to meet agreed capacity and performance requirements. The organization shall monitor capacity usage, analyze capacity and performance data, and identify opportunities to improve performance. Clause 8.4.3 regulates capacity management. The capacity of each resource needs to be measured and its relation calculated in supporting services and service level services. The organization needs to provide sufficient capacity and conduct evaluations and follow up on its realization. Now, coming to the non-conformity. Please see the sample Auditor Finding Action Report NC on screen for writing non-conformities under this clause. Please go through this and try to understand the various components of this non-conformance report. As you can see on your screen, here is Auditor Finding Action Report NC. You can see AFR number, date, company/process, depends on the company, standard ISO, category which can be major or minor, non-conformity observed, requirement, non-conformity evidence, auditor signature, auditee acceptance, root cause analysis, correction, corrective action which has been taken, responsibility, corrective action plan, implementation date, corrective action plan, assessed by. Now, let me talk in brief about the common mistakes auditors do while auditing. It is highly recommended that being an auditor, you should avoid some common mistakes like reporting of findings without verifying evidence, ignoring the facts, asking irrelevant questions to organization, and starting consulting activities with the client, etc. Auditors should avoid these kind of mistakes which are very common in nature during the audits. Dear friends, we have now come to the conclusion of this training session. See you soon with an exciting new topic. Till then, goodbye.